Welcome to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ruby Boris.
And I'm Ann Judge. The Whole Pineapple is a podcast about wellness focused around fertility. And on these weekly mini episodes, we bring you bite-sized ideas for you to snack on.
Like breathing exercises, book reviews. Maybe we'll review some scientific research, or we'll share some wellness and fertility stories from our listeners.
So if you're looking for a tip or a trick related to your fertility and well-being, then you've come to the right place.
Let's dig in.
Well, welcome back to The Whole Pineapple on our short snack. I'm Ann Judge.
I'm Ruby Boris.
We are happy to be back here for another listener story today.
I'm hoping that I don't sound like I'm in a tunnel now. I figured out my setup, and it's kind of an interesting little setup.
It's impressive looking.
I felt like I was hanging out with the Fremont Troll under an underpass because it sounded so echoey. So I think we have it figured out now, and I have this really beautiful setup just in time for our guest today.
It is a very special guest today. I was telling Ruby, of course, she gets her audio set up before our most important guest. And
of course,
the reason it's so important, this is, to my knowledge, the first Whole Pineapple guest that I've ever slept with. So
I was not expecting that.
We are bringing on my husband to talk. Now I've just made Ruby laugh too hard into her new mic. Hello, sweetheart.
Hi, it's great to be here and great to hear that you haven't slept with any of your other guests. That's always reassuring.
I'm dying.
And I am so happy. I mean, for listeners, you may have heard offhand references, but we wanted to have a story about things kind of from the male health perspective. And I know someone that I can force to be on the podcast. So thanks for coming, sweetheart.
You're welcome. Your will is my command. So
I'm sure you're used to this by now, living with somebody who works in the fertility field, that like
Absolutely. Sex
jokes are just part of the job. Oh my gosh, that was great. I needed that in my life today.
So I wanted to start just because, I don't think I've ever really asked you before, like, how would you tell the experience of our fertility journey, like from your point of view? Like if you were having to just tell it to someone that doesn't know it.
I guess I would start with the fact that I didn't even expect us to have a fertility journey to begin with. I come from a family, oldest of 5 kids, so no problems getting pregnant and having kids there. Each of my parents come from large families. No problems having kids there, just kind of assumed. Meet someone, get married, have a few kids, and that's just table stakes for life. And then when we tried to have kids for a few years, we got married young. We got married at 23.
Which seemed totally reasonable at the time. And now I was like, we were way too young.
Yeah, now you look at 23-year-olds, you're like, we were crazy.
You don't know what you were doing, exactly.
But we decided we wanted to wait a little while, have our careers. That's when Anne decided to go into nursing, and I started working at my job. 4 or 5 years after getting married, we decided to start trying, kind of assumed it'll just take a few months, kept trying, didn't happen. And eventually, Anne had the good thinking to say, like, maybe we should go see someone about this. Maybe this isn't normal. Again, all news to me. And when we did go, and I think we went to just your OB's office at Evergreen, or maybe even the fertility clinic at Evergreen.
Initially, it was just my OB, and I thought we were like friends because we worked together as well as patient. And so that's why what happens next was upsetting for me. But yeah, go ahead.
We went there, and I have to admit, looking back, I don't know if it was arrogance or just my family history or maybe even sexism. I just kind of assumed maybe something's wrong with Anne.
Well, you probably thought that for a while. So, yeah.
It probably wasn't the first time.
Well, yeah, for many different things. Well, and also just all the complicated stuff obviously happens in her body. My contribution is very, 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 very small in the grand scheme of things biologically. And the first few rounds of testing or exploration were all focused on Anne. I can't remember when, but at some point the OB suggested that since we're doing tests on Anne or looking at her, we should probably have Nick do a semen analysis as well, just to cover our bases.
That's interesting, because usually it's the first place that we start nowadays.
Even then, I'm like, well, sure, just get this out of the way. Actually, I'd kind of heard stories about these kind of clinics and places. They have nice rooms where you can give a sample and you can kind of enjoy yourself. And so I was like, oh, well, I get to see what this is like. And they just handed me a cup and said, go out into the hospital bathroom in the hallway and do your job. And I remember like, okay, well,
this is happening.
This is not how I imagined my day going when I woke up this morning.
No.
And I go out to this hospital bathroom, and it smells like a hospital bathroom.
Oh, God.
It's just a single person bathroom. It's not like a big stall. I'm not just in a random stall doing something awkward next to other people. But the door was broken.
Oh, my God.
It didn't shut very well. And every time anyone walked by in the hallway, the door would rattle like it was opening. And so I had to really work through some things there to finish the job.
I'm impressed you got through that. I really am.
At any moment, I'm like, someone's is barging in here and gonna be both disgusted and then judgmental that like I come to the hospital to do this.
And may or may not call the police.
Yeah. But you know what? I did it. I manned up and I got it done. And I thought that was the end of it. I remember thinking, glad I never have to do this again.
Check that off the list. That was an interesting experience. Let's move on.
Still, doesn't even occur to me that this could be an issue with me. And we get the results back, I don't know.
It's like a couple of weeks there. Yeah, you tell me, how did we get the results?
Like by carrier pigeon? I don't understand. What do you mean? What do you mean? How did we get was it just a phone call or an email or?
How do you remember getting a diagnosis?
I don't remember how we got the results. I just remember being told, you have no sperm.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It wasn't a number. It wasn't this. It was just, you have no sperm.
Yeah. Anne, how do you remember it?
This is the part that I'm mad about, as they left a voicemail for me. So first of all, looking back now, I'm like, this is crazy. Why did they call me? Why didn't they call him? But they left me a voicemail. It wasn't my doctor calling. It was a nurse in the practice just leaving a voicemail saying, so the sample had no sperm, so we think you should repeat it and go see a fertility clinic. And that was it. And then I never heard from the doc. She never called me. We'd worked together in the hospital. She never mentioned it. Like, it was one of those things where I was like, that was a pretty big thing to leave on someone's answering machine. And you made me tell my husband that, which was really hard. So yeah, I called Nick. I had just gotten off work for a night shift and I was like, hey, we got your results. Can we like meet? And I remember you were, because I was like, do you want to meet? Because I feel like I should tell him in person. And you were busy and you're like, oh, can you just tell me? And I'm like, well, they said there's no sperm. It was just not at all, I think, what either of us were expecting. And we'd been out to dinner like the night before because it had taken longer than I thought it was going to take. I was like, they thought we'd have the results by now. And I think we were joking like, maybe there's a problem with you too. Because we already knew that I wasn't having periods, wasn't ovulating, something was going on with me. But it was still not something that I think either of us expected. And I'm still kind of mad about the way that it all, especially now working here. I was like, there are a lot of things that didn't go right with that. But that was the end of our just testing with an OB. That's when we're like, well, I guess we're just going to go see a fertility clinic then and hopefully have a better experience.
Yeah. Now, did you guys go straight to a reproductive endocrinologist or did you see a urologist first?
Our first visit was at SRM with Dr. Klein. And then as part of that, it was like, you're going to see urology. And then after that, Nick got to do a semen analysis at a fertility clinic, which was a much better experience.
Upgrade.
Well, hold on. It was, but it had its own issues.
Oh, no.
And Anne, I think, knows where this is going.
I know the story, yeah.
But I'll just back up a second. You can probably tell that Anne has a much better memory than I do. Very precise, very accurate.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
I'm just used to it. I run with it.
Oh, yep. She keeps me on track all the time.
When we got over the shock of, wow, I can't have children, kind of the typical way, we went to SRM. Was it the Bellevue office? I can't exactly remember where.
Your first one actually would have been in Kirkland, and then you did one in Bellevue, and then Seattle. You've had private time in almost all of our offices by this point.
Private time. That's a trademark. But we went to whichever office it was. And again, in my mind, I'm like, well, I guess those are mythical, those special rooms where you get to give a sample. And they asked for a sample. And they showed me a very nice room. Like, I'm like, oh, this is what I've heard about. It had a lounger. It had various visual stimuli to help with the process. They had magazines. They said there was a DVD player playing movies.
Because we're old, so this was DVDs. There's no streaming.
Now we have like the Netflix for porn or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. I remember thinking like, I'm moving up in the world. And I go in there and I get, see how to tell this story so that you can picture it just enough, but not too much. I get comfortable and I go to look for the remote to turn on the DVD player. And I cannot find the remote. I'm looking all over the place. I'm looking behind the chair. I'm looking under the chair. I'm looking in the magazines, all this stuff. And I'm in there for a while. Now I'm starting to think like, oh no, they think I'm having problems. I mean, I am having problems, but not the problems they think I'm having. And finally, I'm like, I have to go back out there and ask where the remote is. And then it's awkward because it's been like 10 minutes now. I get dressed and get all ready again and try to walk out there confidently. And I go up, it's right around the corner from like the receptionist desk. And they ask like, is everything okay? And I say, well, I can't find the remote to turn on the TV and the DVD player. And they said, oh, I'm so sorry. No, we have it out here. We control all that from out here. I'm so sorry. We'll get it going for you. And she did. They took out the remote and like pointed it under the desk. They obviously have the like, oh, okay, I'm not an idiot. And I go back in and I see the TVs turning on and the DVD systems booting up, and I get all ready again. I get relaxed. I'm going to knock this out of the park. And it turns on to the main menu of the DVD screen and stays on the main menu of the DVD screen. It's highlighted the play button, but it's not being selected.
Now, is this one that like you have different choices for, or is it just one video?
I think there's probably chapters you could go to.
Okay.
I wasn't really picky. Just playing from the beginning would have been fine. And like most DVD menus, the background is showing little vignettes from what you're about to see if you could only hit the play button. But there's no sound. And I thought for a while, I'm like, I mean, I guess I could make this work. But then I'm like, I deserve this. Like, I deserve a real experience. So I get dressed again, and I walk back out there to the receptionist, and I say, I'm so sorry. The TV is now on, but it's just sitting at the main menu. Could I get you to hit play on that remote? And I think they were probably just as embarrassed as I was.
I'm crying.
And so they hit play, and I walk back in, and it's actually playing the video now. And yeah, I'm in and out of there in like 2 minutes. So, I mean, it was not a problem after that point. But it was like 20 minutes of consternation and setup and embarrassment getting to that point.
Also in the middle, he's texting me, and I was like, no, you go out there. You asked for them to press play. I was like, it's okay. You deserve this.
I was going to leave that part out, but thank you. Thank you for bringing that little tidbit in.
But the most important thing is, except for that initial just random hospital lab, which said no sperm, every other sample after has always found a very tiny amount of sperm.
Non-zero.
And in fertility, there is a huge difference between being told you have no sperm and you have a very tiny amount of non-modal sperm in terms of what you can do.
And that's why we tell people to go to a fertility clinic, because some outside places that aren't trained for fertility, they're just like do kind of a brief, like look around, oh, no sperm. And they don't, take the initiative to say like, okay, now we really need to hunt and see if there is actually, because there is a huge difference between no sperm and a few.
Yeah. And I mean, we're trying to aim for a short snack. So I want it to not only be about your experience giving us the sample, but, to fast forward, we kind of just went from that being told no sperm and having to think, oh my gosh, what are our other options for family building, to suddenly being like, oh, wait, there is the possibility to hopefully do IVF. And it was still like a lot, but it was, at least for me, a big emotional swing, to feel like, okay, we do have options, even though it's not what we thought it was going to be.
I do want to mention one part that you're leaving out now that I feel like other people with testicles need to know about.
Oh, okay.
The day of the real collection. So not for
the day of the egg retrieval when you're giving the sample.
By this point, I know how this all works. Go in there, get things done, come back out, and my job is done. And Anne does a great job. A few hours later, we get the results back. Okay, they got a certain number of eggs and inseminated them, and they're in the lab, and we have to wait 3 to 5 days. And then Anne happens to mention something that she didn't tell me before. I'm so thankful she didn't. She said, oh, we came really close to them having to slice your testicles open because if they couldn't find enough sperm, that's what they do. And I remember saying, whoa, no one ever told me that this was on the table.
Literally.
I don't know if I could have performed had I known that. So she did a good job of not telling me, but I feel like other people should know that is on the table.
And that was a wrong way to describe it, a little bit too graphic. Like nowadays, they use tiny little needles and, but it's still not a great experience to get sperm surgically from the testicles. But yeah, because of your samples, we had to do IVF at a time and window where if there wasn't enough sperm in the sample on the day of egg retrieval, you were that's why neither one of us got to eat or drink that morning, which I think you also didn't quite realize, was that, yeah, if they didn't get enough, then you'd be having surgery that afternoon to make sure that we actually had sperm. Because this is all a while ago. Nowadays, a lot of times if they're concerned about that, they would have had me just freezing eggs so that they would only be thawing the eggs once we knew we already had enough sperm. But this is all kind of old school IVF. Now we have better sperm retrieval techniques as well as the ability to freeze eggs if we're concerned about not having enough on an actual day.
Man, that really does take a lot of pressure off, like not only you guys, but also like the embryology team and just the whole experience.
That was part of the reason that we went so quickly from having just initial testing to instantly doing shots, because that window back in the day, urology was only available for like 1 week each month. And so it just happened to line up that if we started shots right away, like we'd be in that window for urology. And so it all, at least from my perspective, seemed like it happened super fast. Is that how you felt too, Nick? Or
the whole thing was incredibly fast. And from my perspective, outside of my contribution, I had to start giving you a bunch of shots, both leading up to retrieval or insemination or whatever you call it. And then afterwards, it's like a shot a day, I think, for the whole time.
Yeah, this is old school progesterone, big needle on the backside, old school IVF.
Yeah, like the intramuscular shots or whatever, where I had to practice on like an orange or I had to practice on something to get good at it. The next thing that I remember in this whole journey was, it was a few weeks later and we're hoping that you're getting pregnant. And we went on a trip up to Canada. It was a work trip where our partners got to come. And we didn't really participate in too many activities because it was a lot of physical activities. And we were like, we don't want to throw the body through a bunch of vigorous, like downhill mountain biking. And
I'm still sad that I didn't get to go downhill mountain biking. That's what they use the ski lifts for in the summer.
Again, going back to never even thinking there'd be a problem, I kind of had just assumed at this point that it would work. That, okay, there was a setback, but, science to the rescue. We did this. We did everything you're supposed to do. Anne took all the drugs at the right time. Everything kind of looked good. And I remember us driving back from Canada to Seattle, and we stopped at an Olive Garden, I think, Anne. And that's when, you went in to go to the bathroom or something, and you came back out, I think, crying, or had been crying, because you realized you were spotting, and that it likely didn't work. And I remember that being kind of a slap in the face, too, of just, well, wait a minute, we had a problem, we did all the right things. It's supposed to have worked. And they had told us that I knew the statistics and everything like that, but this was like the first big time in my life, at least, where it was like, it doesn't matter how hard you tried, like it didn't work. So I remember that was almost harder than finding out that initial, you don't have any sperm kind of diagnosis. This was well, what's next? Like we did everything, and it didn't work. Is that the end? Do we start talking about adoption or other things like that?
This is all happening before I worked at the fertility clinic. So, I was a labor and delivery nurse, so I kind of got some basic stuff, but I didn't know the ins and outs of fertility treatment. And so having PCOS, I'd never had a regular period. Like I just didn't really bleed on my own. And so when we went to Canada, I deliberately, like, we were going to be doing my first pregnancy test a few days late because we were going to be out of town in Canada. I was like, oh, no big deal, whatever. But it didn't even occur to me that I would get a period if it didn't work, because like I never get periods, whatever, like I never get one. And then this time. And so, yeah, when I just started bleeding, it was just so surprising, because the same thing, it had not occurred to me since when all this happened. We were in our 20s, like we were such like on paper good prognosis, and everyone was always so like hopeful, even though they tell you the stats. You're like, well, I'm going to be on the good side. And the doctor on call was so nice. So I called to be like, I'm bleeding. She's like, well, we don't know, which is true. People can definitely have spotting, bleeding in early pregnancy. But by the next day when I went in for a blood draw, it was like full on. And then it was negative. And I was like, what? I feel like I was still pretty optimistic though, because we had frozen embryos. I was like, well, we know it doesn't work the first time. And for me, I don't think I got really like thrown until we had done several transfers after that. And then we're out of embryos and we're like, oh my gosh, we're like back at square one again. And that's when it was hard to just feel like, I mean, isn't that definition of futility, right? Like trying the same thing again and hoping for a different response. And I guess that was one of my other questions on the list. I feel like from my perspective, you always seemed more optimistic about everything than I was. I think I got sad faster than you did. But did you consider, like, what if this doesn't work for us? Did you kind of think about what else our lives would be like, or those other options?
I did. And it wasn't that I wasn't sad. And you know this, we've been together for over 20 years. I try not to dwell on the past. Yeah, I'm a very typical engineer and probably male persona of, well, how do you fix it? How do you move forward? How do you go through your emotions, get them out of the way, and what's the next step to do something new? So I think I probably focused on that, but I was definitely sad and devastated for me. And I remember not being as optimistic as you, because I remember thinking, well, I mean, if the fresh cycle didn't work, frozen, at least at the time, I guess, is not as good odds. And so we tried the best and it didn't work. So I think that's kind of when I started really thinking about, how many times are we going to try this? Are we going to not have any children? Are we going to do other things to have children, like adopt? Or, I mean, I even like, wow, what if we use someone else's sperm? Or all those things went through my mind. And I didn't agree or disagree with any of them, but they're just there as kind of like, wow, I've never had to consider this before. And thankfully, it was our second major cycle that worked. Fresh cycle. I think it was 2 embryos, right? That we have a picture of them still. We show our daughter, we're like, hey, one of these 2 is you. We don't know which one, obviously, but we still have it somewhere in the house. I'm sure Anne knows exactly where it is in the house.
I do know where it is.
So when you were going through this process, what was it like watching Anne do all of this work? Because it is so intensive on the egg side of things. So sometimes the partners can feel kind of removed.
I didn't feel so much removed as I felt pretty guilty, honestly, in the beginning. Like, this is biologically my fault. And she's the one that has to go through all of this stuff, all of these drugs and exams and procedures and changes to her body that in the beginning don't lead to success, and doing it multiple times over and over. So that's honestly what I felt. Anne did a great job of keeping me involved and in the loop. And, I'm sure you know this, she likes to talk quite a lot. So we had lots and lots of conversations about this.
No.
So yeah, I didn't really feel removed. It was more of like, wow, this is kind of crummy that it's me. It was because of me, but yet Anne's body has to pay the burden for all of this.
And when pregnancy finally happened, was there like a sense of like relaxing, or was there stress all the way through?
There wasn't stress, but a super joyful moment when we got the official word that you were pregnant and the numbers were going up. And I don't know all the details, but they hit the numbers you're supposed to hit. And I feel like even in the beginning there was, they may be high enough to maybe be twins, but I wasn't super stressed out. But I did have that little voice in the back of your head saying, it's not over yet. You thought you could get pregnant or you could have a family without any problems. Now I'm on the lookout for it. Like, there could still be problems. Once we found out, let's say 9 months more to go of making sure it's going, and all this, the 20-week checkup and all these kinds of things, I definitely was more nervous going into those than I think I normally would have been had it just been a normal, typical, natural pregnancy that we got pregnant a few months after starting to try kind of a thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Totally. I feel like obviously working here doing the podcast, like infertility, it really changed so many things. Like it changed my career path. It's such a big part of my identity, even this far after. And I'm just curious, like, do you feel like it changed you in other ways? Like, do you ever bring it up to people, or is it just something that kind of was in the past for you?
Well, I think it changed things in a lot of ways. I'm fairly open about talking about this stuff. Obviously, I'm on this podcast talking about it. It was a little bit eye-opening after that, whenever it did come up in conversation with friends or whatever, to realize that a lot of other people have issues as well. And they'd mention, oh yeah, we did IVF, or we had to do IUIs, or we had a lot of trouble, or we did this, or we did that. In another way, it changed our lives. Some of our best family friends were met through infertility support groups, people going through infertility. And they're some of our best friends to this day. We've been friends with them now for 13 plus years. So yeah, it's completely changed the trajectory of our lives.
Do you bring it up when you see a new doctor though? Like, do you ever mention this? Because there are like long-term potential risks when you have a diagnosis of male factor. I'm just curious if anyone's ever asked you about it.
You know what? That's a great question. And I just had my annual, should be annual physical. I think it was like the first time I've had one in like 5 years.
Way to be a stereotype.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you about my favorite quote in a second but I did not bring that up with, it was a new provider, an NP, and we went through my history, and I don't know why. I completely did not mention that. I'll mention that to her the next time I see her.
That's pretty typical too.
Yeah.
Now, what's the favorite quote?
I tell this to Anne all the time. She's sick and tired of it, but I don't know who made up this quote. I wish I could attribute it, but the quote's supposed to be a guy talking, saying, ladies, look, if a guy says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. You don't have to remind us every 6 months.
Oh, it's so funny because it's true, at least for us.
Yes.
Oh, the forced laughter. Look at that. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about this plant hanger that has been over 1.5 years that's still not up yet.
Ruby, did you have any other questions?
No, that was such a good overview. I think we covered a lot, and I haven't laughed this hard in a long time. So
there's one relevant thing I want to bring up. Once you were pregnant and all the ultrasounds and everything, what did you call our daughter?
We called her Pineapple.
Yeah.
That was our nickname when I was pregnant, because that was, early on, didn't know boy or girl. And we were like, we didn't tell the family what we had picked out as a name until after she was born. And so, yeah, we called her Pineapple. So it's...
See, you guys have to get pineapple tattoos to match mine.
There you go.
That's kind of cool, actually.
Right?
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say, Nick? If you're going to speak to listeners that might, be in a similar setup?
No matter what you're going through, like, life can throw you curveballs at any moment, and they can be for better or for worse, or both at the same time. And hopefully if you stick with it and are open to different avenues, you'll get to where you're trying to go somehow. It may not be the direct path that you just assumed you were going to take beforehand, but hopefully it all works out the way it should work out eventually.
Yeah, I feel like it made us stronger as a couple. Do you agree? Or...
Yes, honey, I 100% agree.
Thank you.
You are correct.
Because you're going through something, and even though you're both processing it in different ways, I feel like you do feel like you're kind of on the same team. And I feel like in some ways, not like I was happy to get your diagnosis, but it also for me made me feel like it was more of a team thing. Because before, I always felt like super guilty, like, oh, I'm not ovulating, I'm the reason, this and that. And so selfishly for me, it was like, oh, look at that, there's issues on both sides, which is actually super common when it comes to fertility treatment. So that I think also made it feel more like, at least from my perspective, we were really on this because of each other.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Us infertile folks are attracted to each other.
Yeah, I guess, But I do feel like we came out of that stronger than ever before.
Yeah.
Oh, Nick, this was so fun. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. And I think your guys' story is going to really be helpful for other people to hear.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Please empty the dishwasher. Love you. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Whole Pineapple Podcast. We hope it was helpful.
If you know someone who could benefit from hearing the podcast, we hope you'll share it with them.
And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review The Whole Pineapple on your favorite podcast app. Every rating and review makes us easier to find.
This podcast is sponsored by Seattle Reproductive Medicine and is produced by Audiotocracy Podcast Production. We'll see you next time. Have a delicious week.